tons of stone that you can't even get a razor blade in between. Like, what the f was going on?
For centuries, the ancient Egyptians were thought to have carved granite with simple stone tools. But new analysis from Grok AI is challenging that story in a big way.
We are now at the crossroads where promise and peril are going to collide.
Hidden patterns inside the stone itself may reveal a level of precision and technology that history never accounted for. The evidence has been there all along.
It is very hard for archaeologists to explain how that was done using purely leverage and mechanical advantage.
The stone that started everything. There is a piece of rock sitting in a quarry in Aswan, Egypt, that has been confusing people for a very long time. It is called the Unfinished Obelisk, and it is exactly what it sounds like. At some point in ancient history, someone began cutting an enormous obelisk directly from the bedrock of the quarry floor. It would have been the largest obelisk Egypt ever produced, standing around 42 meters tall and weighing an estimated 1,200 tons. And then, for reasons nobody fully understands, the work stopped. The obelisk never moved. It is still there today, partially carved out of the surrounding granite, lying at an angle in the quarry like a monument frozen mid-sentence. Cracks appeared in the stone during cutting, and that is the most commonly accepted reason the work halted. But what makes the unfinished obelisk so valuable to researchers is not the obelisk itself. It is the surface around it. The quarry walls and floors surrounding the obelisk are covered in the actual tool marks left behind by whoever was doing the cutting. Those marks have been sitting there in plain sight for thousands of years, waiting for someone to look at them carefully enough. For most of the 20th century, the explanation was simple and widely accepted. Ancient Egyptians pounded the granite using balls of an even harder stone called dolerite. Granite is extraordinarily tough. You cannot scratch it with copper or bronze.
What is actually going to do the cutting? It seems to me that copper is just going to blunt on granite. I can't believe it's going to cut.
But dolerite, which rates higher on the hardness scale, can eventually break granite down through repeated impact. Workers would have swung or dropped these stone balls against the granite surface, slowly pounding it into dust and debris, then clearing the material away and starting again. Patient, exhausting, and physically possible. Those marks had been visible for thousands of years. Nobody had asked the right question yet. That was about to change. When experimental archaeologists tried to replicate the dolerite pounding method in controlled conditions, they ran into something uncomfortable almost immediately. The marks they produced were rough, irregular, pitted in an uneven, almost chaotic pattern, the kind of surface you would expect from repeated blunt impact. When you hit granite with a heavy stone ball again and again, the granite does not scoop out smoothly. It fractures, it chips. It leaves behind a surface that looks battered and beaten because that is exactly what it is. The marks at Aswan do not look battered. They look scooped. Curved, smooth-walled depressions that follow a consistent geometry across the quarry floor and walls. The interior surfaces of the marks curve inward in a way that suggests not impact from above, but rotation from within. That is a fundamentally different kind of motion, and it produces a fundamentally different kind of mark. Beyond the shape of the marks, there is the question of time. Estimates for how long it would have taken to carve the unfinished obelisk using the dolerite method run into deeply uncomfortable territory. Some calculations suggest it would have required hundreds of thousands of working hours, decades of sustained, organized labor on a single stone. That is not impossible in theory, but it raises hard questions about how the ancient Egyptians managed to produce so many large granite monuments across so many sites in the relatively short time frames their historical records suggest. You cannot be pounding one obelisk for 40 years and simultaneously building everything else the archaeological record shows them building. Archaeologists had noticed this discrepancy before. It had been written about, discussed at conferences, and then largely set aside because no better explanation had come along to replace the standard one. The dolerite theory remained the default answer for over 100 years. Then someone handed the images to an AI and asked it to look without assumptions. The standard answer had lasted over a century. Then someone let an AI look at the same evidence with completely fresh eyes. In 2024, high-resolution photographs of the Aswan quarry surfaces, including the tool marks around the Unfinished Obelisk and several other quarry locations in the region, were run through Grok, the AI system developed by Elon Musk's Grok AI. The analysis was not set up to find a specific answer or confirm a particular theory. It was doing what AI does exceptionally well, identifying patterns in large amounts of visual data without beginning from a fixed theoretical position. No assumptions going in, just the images and the numbers that came out. The results were specific enough to take seriously. Grok identified that the geometry of the marks was consistent across the quarry in a way that would be extremely difficult to produce using handheld impact tools. The depressions followed rotational patterns. The walls of the scoops curved in a way that matched the path of a spinning tool moving through resistant material, not the irregular fracture pattern left by a stone ball being hammered or dropped against a surface. The statistical detail here is the part that matters most. Across the marks analyzed, the variation in size between individual depressions was less than 5%. The spacing between marks varied by less than 3%. That level of consistency, repeated across a massive quarry site, covering a huge area of cutting work done over what must have been an extended period, is a number that is very hard to produce by hand. Human workers, no matter how skilled or experienced, introduce variation into their work. Their arms tire across a long shift. Their angles shift as they reposition themselves. Their strike patterns drift when fatigue sets in. The marks at Aswan show something that was maintaining its geometry with a precision that simply does not look manual. Numbers that precise do not appear by accident. But the most unsettling discoveries were not in the broad patterns. They were hiding in the corners. When the analysis moved beyond the broad quarry surface and into more specific features of the site, several anomalies emerged that the dolerite theory has no clean answer for. Some of the tool marks appear in locations that are physically difficult and, in certain cases, effectively impossible for a human worker to access using hand tools. Narrow recesses, deeply undercut surfaces, angles that would require a tool to be operating in a direction that no hand-swung or dropped stone ball could physically achieve. If you are working with a heavy stone hammer, you need room to swing it. You need gravity to help, or at the very least not work directly against you. Some of the marks at Aswan are in positions where neither of those conditions would apply to any known hand tool. They are there. Something made them. What that something was is the open question. Then there are the test pits. Scattered across the quarry area are vertical shafts cut down into the granite, narrow and very deep, some of them reaching between 30 and 50 feet below the surface. These are understood to be exploratory cuts, made to test the quality of the stone at depth before committing to full-scale extraction of a large block. What is remarkable about them is the condition of their interior walls. They are smooth, consistent from top to bottom. The walls of these pits curve gently to follow the internal grain structure of the stone beneath, adjusting direction as if whoever was cutting them could somehow sense what was happening inside the rock they were moving through. The diameter of the cut stays consistent across their full depth without the narrowing or irregular deviation you would expect from a manual operation, gradually losing precision and control as the tool moves further from the worker's hands. Producing a cut like that with any hand-operated tool at that depth Maintaining that level of consistency to the very bottom goes well beyond what current experimental replication of ancient methods has been able to demonstrate. The pits exist. They are measurable. The question of what produced them remains open. Impossible angles and perfectly smooth, deep shafts raised serious questions. But the real shock was waiting under a microscope at the cut surfaces. The most technically detailed aspect of Grok's analysis comes from microscopic examination of the cut surfaces. This work combines earlier physical studies of granite samples from the site with AI-driven pattern recognition applied to high-magnification images of the cutting surfaces. At these cut faces, spiral patterns are embedded within the stone. While invisible to casual visitors, they become clear under magnification. Such spirals are a well-known signature of rotational cutting. When a spinning tool moves through hard material, it leaves a helical trace in the grain, a physical record of its motion. The spirals observed at Aswan match patterns produced by rotary cutting tools rather than impact methods. Impact creates irregular fracture patterns, while rotation produces consistent spiral markings. These features strongly suggest a controlled rotational cutting process rather than simple pounding. Even more striking are granite particles found at the cut edges that show signs of partial fusion. Their crystal structure has been altered in a way that requires intense, localized heat applied at a precise point. Granite does not change easily. Disrupting its mineral structure requires very high temperatures. This indicates that the cutting process concentrated energy in a small area. A stone impact would distribute force broadly, not focus enough energy to produce such changes. Additionally, trace analysis has identified particles of diamond dust and corundum embedded in the cut surfaces. Both are harder than granite and are commonly used in modern precision cutting, suggesting a more advanced process than simple stone tools. Modern industrial processes left the same fingerprints as ancient stone. That was strange enough. Then the map of the quarry revealed something even stranger. One of the details in Grok's analysis that drew particular attention was the placement of the test pits across the quarry area. They are not scattered randomly. When their positions are mapped against the known geological structure of the Aswan granite deposit, a pattern becomes visible. The pits are located along hidden fault lines and mineral vein boundaries inside the rock, features that are not visible from the surface and cannot be identified by simply looking at the quarry floor. Modern quarrying operations use ground-penetrating surveys and computer modeling to identify where the internal weaknesses and high-quality zones in a stone deposit lie before any cutting begins. The goal is to plan extraction so that fault lines are avoided, quality yield is maximized, and material waste is reduced before it becomes expensive. The layout of the Aswan quarry, when mapped and analyzed by Grok, follows a logic that mirrors this kind of pre-planned, structure-aware extraction strategy precisely. The cuts go where the best stone is. They stop before fault lines that would compromise the integrity of the extracted block. The overall geometry of the quarry, taken as a whole, resembles the output of a computer-optimized extraction plan far more than it resembles the organic trial-and-error pattern you would expect from workers learning the stone as they go. How people working thousands of years ago could have known where the internal fault lines were located and organized their entire quarrying operation systematically around that knowledge is a question that the dolerite pounding theory does not even attempt to address. Someone knew exactly where to cut before cutting began. But one depression in the quarry floor suggested the most staggering achievement of all. On the southern side of the main quarry area, there is a large depression in the bedrock. It had been noted in previous surveys, but not assigned any particularly significant interpretation. Grok's pattern analysis suggested a different reading of what that depression might represent. The geometry of the depression is consistent with the cavity left behind after a very large rectangular block was successfully extracted and removed from the bedrock. If that interpretation holds up, the block in question would have weighed somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 tons. To put that in concrete terms, the largest confirmed stones ever moved by ancient Egyptians in any documented monument weigh around 1,000 tons, and those are the exceptional cases that archaeologists point to as evidence of extraordinary capability. Most of the famous monuments use stones measured in the hundreds of tons range. A block in the 3,000 to 5,000 ton range would occupy a completely different category of achievement. Moving something of that weight would require either a scale of organized labor that dwarfs anything previously documented, methods of moving stone that have not yet been identified by modern research, or both. If the block was removed and transported somewhere and incorporated into a structure, we have not yet identified where it went. If the depression is a removal cavity, the question of where a 5,000-ton stone ended up is one that archaeology currently has no answer for. That gap in the record is itself worth noting. A 5,000-ton stone vanished without explanation. Before anyone could process that, the quarry walls offered one final, timeline-breaking surprise. Here is where the story takes a turn that the established timeline of Egyptian history has not fully resolved. On the walls of the Aswan quarry, in several locations, there are paintings applied in red ochre. These are not unusual objects for an ancient Egyptian site in isolation. Red ochre markings and paintings are found throughout the region and across many archaeological sites. But their position relative to the tool marks created a problem that is difficult to argue around. In several specific locations, the red ochre paintings sit directly on top of the tool marks. They were applied to the surface after the cutting was already done. The paintings have been dated using accepted methods to between 4,000 and 6,000 years before the Common Era. That places them in the pre-dynastic period, before the pharaohs, before the organized Egyptian state, before the civilization we associate with pyramid building and monumental construction. If the paintings are sitting on top of the tool marks existed first, which means the cutting in those locations predates 4000 BCE at minimum. That is significantly earlier than the dates conventionally assigned to Egyptian quarrying activity, and the gap is not a small one. And then there is the quality pattern across the timeline. When the tool marks are mapped in rough chronological order based on geological layering and position relative to the overlying paintings, something unexpected comes up. The oldest marks are the most precise. The smoothness, the geometric consistency, the accuracy of the curves, all of it is highest in the sections that appear to be the earliest. As the timeline moves forward toward marks that are demonstrably more recent, the precision declines. The work becomes rougher and more variable. It begins to look more like what experimental replication of the dolerite method actually produces. Whatever method produced the most precise marks, it was not passed down intact to the generations that came after. The later workers were doing something different, and the surface of the stone shows that difference clearly. That is a pattern running in the wrong direction for the standard story of gradual human technological progress. The oldest marks were the most precise. Progress was running completely backwards. 3 explanations exist for all of this, and none of them are comfortable. Grok's analysis identifies patterns and measures what is there. It does not tell you what happened. That interpretation still belongs to human reasoning, and right now there are 3 broad possibilities that researchers and serious independent analysts have been working through.
The precision of this building exceeds anything that we require of builders today.
The first is lost technology. The people working at Aswan in the earliest period developed cutting tools or methods that were highly effective but left behind no surviving physical examples recoverable. Today, tools built from organic or composite materials or techniques that relied on processed rather than durable metal or stone equipment would not necessarily survive thousands of years in the archaeological record. Advanced capability without recoverable artifacts is not a contradiction. It just means the evidence for the tool itself has not survived, and only the marks it left in the granite remain as the record of its existence. The second possibility is a pre-dynastic civilization operating in the Nile Valley at a level of technical sophistication that current archaeology has not fully documented or accounted for. The timeline suggested by the painting evidence points to significant organized activity before dynastic Egypt. If a technically capable culture was working in this region before the Pharaonic period began, and if the full extent of that culture's capabilities did not carry forward into the dynastic period intact, then what we are looking at in the oldest sections of the Aswan quarry may be the physical remains of something considerably older and more capable than the Egypt that appears in most history books. The third possibility is that the accepted Egyptian timeline is in need of meaningful revision, not a dramatic overhaul, not thousands of extra years added wholesale, but a genuine evidence-driven shift in where certain capabilities are placed on the chronological map. If the earliest sophisticated quarrying in the Nile Valley began earlier than currently accepted dates allow, and if the culture responsible for that early work had capabilities that the later dynastic Egyptians only partially inherited or replicated, then some of the dates and assumptions built into the standard model need to be revisited. Archaeological timelines have been revised before when new physical evidence demanded it. The evidence at Aswan may be making that demand now. Smooth rotational marks in granite, microscopic spirals, fused crystal edges, diamond and corundum particles, red ochre paintings sitting on top of cuts that predate dynastic Egypt. Grok AI did not create any of this evidence. It measured what was already there. The stones at Aswan have been saying something for a very long time. The question is whether the rest of us are ready to listen carefully enough to hear it. What explanation makes the most sense to you? And what single question would you most want answered? Drop it in the comments below and subscribe so you never miss the next discovery.